Hello, my name is Lara Norkus-Crampton, and I'm a registered nurse, live in the city of Minneapolis, and I'm a former planning commissioner with the city. And I'm here today talking with my state representative, Frank Hornstein.
Hi, Lara.
Hi, so glad you could be here today. And we are here to talk about the garbage burner. And some of you may have heard it's called the HERC, or the Hennepin Energy Recovery Center. And it boils down to a garbage incinerator in the middle of downtown Minneapolis. And now you can see it, I believe, from the new Twin Stadium. So, and when I was a commissioner with the city, the garbage burner people, Covanta is the company, and Hennepin County came before us to ask for a special permit, a conditional use permit, to increase the burning capacity of the garbage burner by 212 tons per day. Their current contract with the city allows them to burn 1,000 tons a day, 365 days a year. This came before us because they had to get a special permit for this increase. And in this case, the way the conditional use permits work is that they have to meet certain findings to allow for this kind of a use. So at the hearing in June of 2009, what the Planning Commission found was that increasing the capacity of the garbage burner in all probability could be detrimental to the public health, safety, comfort, or general welfare. They also found that increasing the capacity of the garbage burner in all probability could be injurious to the use and enjoyment of other property in the vicinity, and in all probability could impede the normal and orderly development and improvement of surrounding property for uses permitted in the district. These are two required findings that any conditional use permit must meet. And based on the evidence presented to us at the hearing, we found that they could not meet that standards. And I'm very thankful that my representative, Frank Hornstein, actually appeared at the commission hearing along with Karen Clark and other concerned citizens. And Frank, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you presented and how you saw this issue as it came before the Planning Commission? Because this was all new to me. I really didn't know very much about it, and we really had to rely on the expertise of others coming before us at that hearing.
Well, first of all, Lara, I want to thank you. Your voice was so important at that hearing. It continues to be really critical as a public health nurse, as someone who really understands the health crisis that we're in this city and in this country, the impacts of pollution on asthma, on public health in general. You've been a real champion. And so first, I just wanted to thank you for your voice. It was very important at the Planning Commission. It continues to be important as we address this permit at the Pollution Control Agency and possibly again at the City Council. So thank you. You're absolutely correct. This is a significant increase in garbage burning capacity that Hennepin County is looking at, up to 20%. And so, of course, when you're burning more garbage, you're going to have more harmful emissions. Burning garbage emits heavy metals, very dangerous heavy metals, into the air and, of course, into the general environment. And so that is why there is such concern on the part of so many about this proposed increase that Hennepin County wants to put forward. And so when we look at the health impacts, we're concerned about emissions of dioxin, lead, cadmium, mercury. There's also a number of greenhouse gas emissions that come out of this incinerator in a time when we're really trying to do all we can to curb global warming. This is a major source of greenhouse gas emissions. PCA data indicates that this is the #1 emitter of toxic air pollutants in the city of Minneapolis. And so instead of expanding such a facility, we should really be phasing it out, I think, over time. But right now, our concern is just to make sure that this expansion doesn't go through and that proper environmental study takes place.
You know, it was very interesting because one of the letters that came forward from the city, I have to say the city planning department and in fact the city attorney recommended that the Planning Commission approve this application, approve this conditional use permit. And which surprised me when I kept looking at the data. And one of the things that Eric Nilsson, one of the city attorneys, actually said was that the scientific evidence saying that there were dangers with garbage incineration, he called them anecdotal. And I was very surprised at that because the more research I did on my own, which of course I had to do as a commissioner because that's part of my due diligence, is to try to figure out what's going on because we were given so little information initially to decide this. was that there was a lot of evidence out there. Can you share with us some of the things that you have known? You mentioned the Pollution Control Agency and some of the emissions on there. What are some of the health effects of some of these emissions that we're talking about?
There's absolutely nothing anecdotal about the fact that when you burn garbage, even with air pollution control equipment on the stack, that these harmful emissions are being released into the environment. That is not anecdotal, that is fact. So, heavy metals really, I think, and some of these other particulates, the fine particulate matter that comes out of the stack, there's a variety of health impacts. The fine particulates, I think, are one of the triggers for asthma. We have elevated asthma rates, particularly in the urban core of Minneapolis, some of the neighborhoods where the incinerator is located, some of the neighborhoods where the plume of that incinerator goes, whether it's in the winter where our prevailing winds are northwest to southeast. Some of that will get deposited in some of the neighborhoods just to the south and east of downtown. Already neighborhoods impacted by lead and other health impacts. And of course, when it's southeast to northwest, then you're right on to the north side. So these are some of the communities that we're especially concerned about in terms of deposition of these heavy metals.
What we have on the screen right now is a map that lays out exactly where the highest incidences of asthma hospitalizations and high lead exposures, lead blood levels are in the city of Minneapolis. And as you can see, they're predominantly on the north side and the south side. Now these are exactly the areas where a modeling study showing where, they tried to show predictions of where these harmful emissions would land. And what that study showed was the same areas, the north side and the south side, different parts. There have been no follow-up studies to see whether that modeling was or was not correct. The other graph I would like to show here where we're talking about this is asthma rates in Hennepin County. Actually, an epidemiologist from the Minnesota Department of Health presented this at an air quality conference put on by Keith Ellison, which we're very thankful to him for his work on this. And there is supposed to be a follow-up conference talking about incineration and other industrial uses and their effects on asthma rates of children in the city. So we're looking forward to seeing that happen. But what they showed was that, as you can see here, the blue sections for adults and children, and I think for children it's the most impressive. The overall asthma rates for children in Hennepin County is 9.2%. Now, when you look at, then they distribute what for the city itself, the city of Minneapolis versus the inner ring suburbs. And for the city of Minneapolis, the asthma rates are 11.4% in the city, and then 8.2% in suburban Hennepin County. And that would include Minnetonka and St. Louis Park, both cities that right now ship their garbage to downtown Minneapolis to the garbage burner to be burnt here. And I think that was another surprise for me coming into this, knowing very little about this issue, was that the current contract that the city has with Covanta and that Hennepin County has with Covanta, the arrangement allows for them to burn 1,000 tons per day. It doesn't have to just come from the city of Minneapolis. It can come from the surrounding suburbs. It can come from outside of Hennepin County. They're entitled to that contract no matter how much we reduce, reuse, recycle, compost. That's a very shocking statistic. I had no idea where this contract came from. Now you were involved in the original garbage burner issue back in the day when this first got started. Can you just give us a little background on how all this got going and how we ended up down this crazy path?
Sure, that's a really helpful and important question. Back in the 70s, there was proper concern about landfills, putting garbage in landfills. Landfills were leaking. The leaking landfills got into the groundwater and caused all kinds of problems. So the state actually mandated counties to reduce and even stop landfilling. And so the counties then went towards incineration at that point. Despite, I think, many warnings that that there were many problems with incineration, that really the main way to reduce waste is to focus on recycling and waste reduction. And at the same time, the state then did develop a hierarchy, which put at its top, first you reduce waste, you reuse items, you reduce waste, you recycle, We've made some amendments to that over the years where organics composting is also elevated, and then incineration and landfilling are the last resort. But unfortunately, what's happened in the state, and Hennepin County is a case study of this, the move towards incineration has really impeded doing the proper thing, which is focusing on recycling, composting, and reducing waste to begin with. And so, unfortunately, Hennepin County is recycling now about the same amount it recycled when that burner started in approximately 1989, 1990. And so, unfortunately, now they want to expand the burner, and at the same time, they have really no very ambitious plan to increase recycling. A few things here and there, I think, are mostly public relations on their part, but no real aggressive strategy. The resources, the money, the political power, the political capital is really put into keeping this burner running and even expanding it. So we need to make sure that the county, before it expands incineration, really does a much better job of recycling, doing organics composting, putting their resources, putting their effort into that. In the end, it's much cheaper to do recycling and composting than incineration, which is the most expensive way to manage ash. And then the final irony of all of this, Lara, and you raised this at the hearing a couple of years ago, is that if you're trying to prevent landfilling, a quarter of what goes into that burner ends up as material that has to be landfilled anyway, and it's the incinerator ash. The ash that gets caught in the stacks, the fly ash, and then the bottom ash, which comes out of the grate at the bottom. This ash concentrates these toxins that are in the garbage, and so you actually have a much more hazardous material that you have to landfill. There's less of it, but it's more hazardous and very expensive also to manage. It's a separate kind of a landfill that this has to go into. So it really defeats the purpose. You're still landfilling. You're creating a material that has to be landfilled, which is much more dangerous than what you had initially. Mm-hmm. You're creating this air pollution, and half of what gets burned, here's the thing that really is, I think, the most important thing for our audience to take away here. Half of what's burned can be easily recycled anyway. We're talking about cardboard. We're talking about office paper. We're talking about food waste, which ought to be composted, and newspapers. And so all those things ought to be recycled, and much of that is coming not from people's households, because we're doing a good job as households mm-hmm. doing recycling those materials, but from businesses and commercial establishments and apartment buildings. And that's where the county and the city and then some of these other municipalities around the county ought to be really focusing a lot more effort rather than burning.
And I appreciate that information. You know, the thing that strikes me again and again, though, is that with this contract, no matter how good we are, and you know, I live in the East Calhoun neighborhood, and of course we're trying to do municipal composting. We're doing single source, you know, recycling to make it easier for everybody, and that doesn't change how much gets burned in the burner and how much it affects our citizens, because no matter what we do, they're still entitled to burning that amount. And that was a very surprising fact to me that came through at the hearing. And so I guess, you know, the main thing here that I would just advise people to do, and I really think it's important, is to talk to your council member, talk to your county commissioner. This issue is a very big issue, and where things are right now is that Covanta and Hennepin County appealed the Planning Commission's denial of this conditional use permit. And they are contending that we got it wrong and that they should be able to allowed to burn this increased amount of 212 tons per day. What the Pollution Control Agency, after being petitioned by citizens and hearing from legislators and other people, they required at least some sort of an environmental assessment worksheet, which is a very, very basic environmental review. And it's mostly self-reported data, correct? Mm-hmm. It's not like an independent third party or anything like that. And so they said, you know, if you want to appeal this decision, you have to give us some data to show us whether or not what you're doing would comply with this and what the latest emissions are. And we have had several extensions. This appeal was filed in 2009. I think it was up before the City Council 4 or 5 times now, and it continues to be extended because that data has not been forthcoming to the Pollution Control Agency. They cannot rule on it. And so it puts the city in a bind because they don't have any data really to measure it. They can go based on the modeling and certainly what other organizations and other international organizations and environmental organizations have said about this, but they don't have data specifically for the downtown garbage burner. Is that correct?
Yes, and we've asked actually the county to do a full environmental impact statement. As you correctly point out, Lara, an environmental awareness worksheet is just very, very cursory. It doesn't give us the information we need to allow something like this to proceed into a permitting process, because there's just not a lot of data out there that they're really required to present, and that it will be critically analyzed. The other thing that an environmental impact statement does is it requires the proposer, in this case Hennepin County and Covanta, to really do a thorough evaluation of alternatives. And we think there are so many great alternatives to burning garbage, and that is, again, increasing our ability to recycle. You had mentioned this composting project in East Calhoun. In my neighborhood in Linden Hills, half of our neighborhood is participating voluntarily in an effort where once a week they put out their compostables, their food waste, soiled pizza boxes, paper products like napkins that can't be recycled. And all of this accounts for 15 or 20% of the waste stream that's burned. None of that goes into the garbage for half the households in Linden Hills. We are diverting significant amount from garbage incinerators and landfills and making a good, clean compost that's used from everything from road bed material to agricultural purposes. That's a much better and safer and environmentally beneficial way to handle waste than burning it. So we have really great alternatives out there, and that's what the county should be pursuing.
And I guess the other thing I think about too is that there are other cities, not every city has a garbage incinerator. I mean, it seems like the message that keeps getting put out there is that this is a really necessary part of waste management and so-called resource recovery. Well, if you burn something, it's kind of hard to recover it. I mean, if you could do waste diversion things where you're recycling, sorting out, valuable components of different things. And I know that cities, very large cities and landlocked cities like San Francisco, are doing zero waste strategies. They've done huge waste diversion projects. Mm. And they're a very landlocked, urban, very dense area. They do not have an incinerator. They've refused a lot of incinerators, and they're really making things work well.
Well, yeah, and it raises another interesting point, which is sometimes this will be justified as a power plant. Well, it's a minimal amount of electricity that's generated, and when you're using recyclable material to generate electricity, like burning paper, is a very, very inefficient and actually wastes a lot more energy than if you were to recycle that same ton or pound of paper. So this is actually an extremely wasteful way to generate electricity, an extremely polluting way. It's actually a lot more polluting than coal. If you look at the amount of electricity that's generated in the burner versus coal. Now, coal is terrible too. I'm not an advocate of that. But to think that this is actually dirtier than coal really gives you some perspective. So this is not a power plant. It relies on burning recyclables. It creates harmful emissions. It creates harmful ash that has to be landfilled. There's just really no good reason to expand this facility. And if anything, the long-term goal of the county should be to phase it out. Now, you mentioned, is it really necessary? Now, we had in 2007 legislation at the legislature that asked a working group to be formed in the state to really look at how are we going to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions so that we can actually make an impact on stopping global warming. We know that global warming is accelerating. The science is in. This is not a question. This is not debatable that we have climate change occurring. It's occurring rapidly, and that we're going to have to make some significant reductions by 2050 in order to really avert a wholesale I think, an environmental calamity with climate change. And so the state formed something called the Minnesota Climate Change Advisory Group, and it brought together business and environmental groups and citizens and the public sector, a real diverse group of folks to study in each sector, how can we reduce the greenhouse gas emissions? Well, in solid waste and waste management, which is a source of of course, greenhouse gas emissions, both from landfills and incinerators. They said we ought to be looking at recycling and composting 75% of the waste stream by the year 2025, which can be done. But it can be done only if we put our resources and our political energy behind it rather than the status quo. The status quo won't hold when it comes to doing something about climate change. And so we ought to be looking at a 75% recycling and composting rate. You know, Hennepin County is barely making it to 40% at this point. So how are we going to get there if we continue to put our eggs in the incineration basket?
That's a very good point. And I guess the other thing I'd like to reiterate along the public health grounds, which is basically why we denied this permit, because the more we looked at the data, it just became so clear that you could not say that if you're increasing toxic emissions, you're not going to be hurting people, potentially hurting people and hurting their public health. And groups like the Massachusetts Medical Society, the Florida Medical Association, my union, the Minnesota Nurses Association, other medical groups around the country have all come out to say that garbage incineration is a huge source of air pollutants and toxins that affect people, and especially children. And when you look at the asthma rates, when you look at where the asthma rates are located, and they're located closer to where industrial sources of pollution are, and one of the big sources in our county, of course, is a downtown garbage burner. And it's our children that are being hurt by this waste management policy. So the other issue is, the other finding was talking about will not hurt or the use or enjoyment of neighboring properties or properties in the vicinity. You know, the thing with the emissions on this, I mean, it's not like there's a wall that the emissions bump up against and then they can't go. They go wherever the wind blows. And part of the emissions were predicted to be landing at the North Minneapolis-Fridley border. Part of the emissions look like they're going over into possibly Ramsey County. So, you know, this isn't just a Minneapolis or even a Hennepin County issue. This is a regional issue, is when you're adding industrial pollutants to an area, the cumulative effect of all this on the citizens can be huge. And the city just passed ordinances on community gardening, on urban agriculture. And at this point, we still don't have the studies to know where these emissions have been landing for the last 23, 24 years from the burner, to even know if these areas are actually safe for growing food. And it's not like these emissions happened years ago and we just have to clean it up. They continue to fall. And so the argument that I've heard, or the feeling that I get, is it's supposed to be sort of a buyer beware situation for the people who want to grow greens in their backyard. That just seems like a really impossible standard and a really unjust way of managing these emissions. You know, the polluters should be dealing with this. The polluters should be telling us where these things are landing. It should be the polluter's burden to prove to us that this is okay or not okay, or what the impact has been so far. Do you agree with that statement?
Absolutely, and think of just the scale of this. 1,000 tons a day of garbage being burned. Of course that's going to generate a lot of emissions, and that's why when we look at the PCA data as to the point sources, where's the air pollution coming from, the single highest source of toxic air pollution in the city of Minneapolis is that downtown garbage burner. And then you think of the fact that it's 250 tons a day of this hazardous ash are created. And so this is a real significant problem. And again, we're simply saying, don't expand it. Let's use this time when this is being considered, this expansion is being considered, let's instead start the process of redirecting our waste management policy away from incineration, away from landfilling and ash landfilling, and towards what I think everybody agrees is the waste management strategy that will create jobs, that will be much better and beneficial for the environment. It's, of course, much better energy policy when we reduce our waste, we recycle our waste, and we compost what can be safely composted. We know that with 3/4 of our waste stream, we can do that recycling, waste reduction, and composting. So this is the chance to really make Minneapolis and Hennepin County a model. Unfortunately, both the city and the county are sort of lagging behind, even when we compare ourselves to other communities in Minnesota and, of course, other communities around the country are doing a much better job than we are. So this is our chance. We can really make a difference for the environment, for climate change, for jobs, and I think this is, I look at this as a really opportunity to redirect our policy again, rather than doing the same old, which hasn't worked. It hasn't increased our recycling. It's only degraded the environment, and it's not the way to go. Excellent.
And again, this issue, at this point, it's been postponed again. I've heard at March it may be coming for an appeal before the city.
It's hard to tell. Right now, the Pollution Control Agency is looking at it. They're going to, issue some findings in terms of an environmental awareness worksheet, and then it may go back to city. But this is something that there's significant consensus among environmental groups on. Not only do we have the Minnesota Nurses Association on record as opposing it, the major environmental groups working in the city of Minneapolis strongly oppose this. Groups like Clean Water Action, the Sierra Club, Environment Minnesota, Minnesota Public Interest Research Group has taken this on as an important priority. So the environmental community is united that this is a bad idea to expand the Hennepin County incinerator.
And what the Minnesota Nurses Association said specifically is, let's put the public health first in our waste management practices. And as a nurse, what we're always looking for is best practices that are evidence-based. Well, when I looked at the evidence, I'm like, how in the world can you consider this a best practice in any way? And so let's do the studies, let's see what really works, let's study what other cities have done, and then come up with our own best practices based on things like public health, environmental justice, ecological health, those kinds of things that will really give us direction as far as what is a benign way of handling these things, and how can we really do true resource recovery. If you burn something, you don't make it disappear and you don't recover it.
Right.
You're creating more dioxins. I heard from one of the recycling people that the largest source of dioxins from the burner comes from burning white paper. Now that just seems crazy to me. And this is just me talking as a citizen, coming into this knowing very little. And the more I look at the issues on here, the more crazy it seems. And it's hard for me to see a wonderful city like Minneapolis who wants to be sustainable. I worked very hard as a planning commissioner to set up the sustainability plan, working plan for the city. This does not seem to fit with that image in any way, shape, or form. I don't understand exactly how we got here, but I'm glad we have the opportunity to reconsider, to fully explore it, and I hope that Hennepin County and Covanta will cooperate and really provide the citizens of Minneapolis some real thoughtful studies and some real data to understand just what the impact of this facility has been on our communities.
And very importantly, that the Pollution Control Agency really press for that and hold them accountable, and ultimately that if this goes before the City Council again, as Covanta and Hennepin County appeal, the good decision that you made as a planning commission, if it goes before the City Council again, citizens really do need to contact their City Council member in the City of Minneapolis and tell them to vote no against this expansion of the Hennepin County incinerator.
Thank you very much, and I would also just invite citizens, call 311 with your council member's name, and they can give you contact information very easily. And this issue is not going to be going away. We don't know how long things are going to be postponed. It's been over 2 years now, so it's hard to gauge, but it continues to be important, and this is a real issue that has a real impact on real people in our community. So I hope you found this informative, and thank you again so much, and thanks to the citizens who have been working on this, and have a great day.